His breath fogged in the recycled air as recruit fingers traced worn letters on a dented canteen, each scratch a desperate claim to identity, soon to be erased. Above the barracks entrance, a red lamp pulsed in measured intervals, 3 beats on, 2 off, casting everything in the color of dried blood. The metal walls seemed to breathe with each crimson flash, and beneath the sharp tang of industrial disinfectant lay something else, the sweet, cloying residue of fear and human waste. On the plasteel chalkboard beside the door, chalked in neat administratum script, a single line declared the arithmetic of this place. Acceptable training losses, 19%. The number had been updated twice, previous figures scraped away, but still visible as ghostly impressions. No one explained what made 19% acceptable, or who calculated these quotas before the first drill began. The recruits simply learned to hold their questions like their breath. This is Muster Depot 69/Theta, where the Imperium converts flesh and faith into fungible firepower through ritualized brutality. It is not a school. Schools imply the possibility of failure without death. This is a factory operating on industrial logic. Inputs arrive as planetary tithes and conscription levies. Processes include drill formations and doctrinal conditioning. Outputs emerge as regiment assignments, penal gang transfers, and servitor stock allocations. The red lamps serve purposes beyond illumination, though those purposes remain unspoken. Protocol dictates their activation during specific hours, their placement at designated intervals. The recruits have learned instinctively to freeze when the lights begin their sequence, some primal recognition of predator signals. A clerk moved through the barracks, collecting names without writing them down. He rubbed each identification tag between finger and thumb, translating persons into 6-digit codes spoken into a servo skull that blinked and filed. The boy with the canteen repeated his new number like a prayer. In camps, numbers carry farther than names. They stack. They balance ledgers. Beyond the blast doors, the training ground reeked of solvent and boiled cloth. First lessons came without weapons. Stand, kneel, prone, spring. The litany of the lasgun mouthed over empty hands. Bodies learned the shape of rifles before feeling their weight. Failure earned correction from a cane with a small bell. Each strike rang once for the man, once for the room. Memory made audible. Through reinforced windows, another transport convoy approached across the ash-waste plains, vehicles moving in perfect formation with sealed cargo compartments. Inside those compartments, new batches of conscripts clutched photographs and letters, unaware that within hours these items would be catalogued, confiscated, and incinerated according to regulation. The convoy drew closer. The red lamps pulsed faster. The factory prepared to receive fresh material. The tour in tour, convoy's engines wheezed to silence as blast doors cycled open, revealing the true scope of what had begun in that red-lit barracks. Those pulsing lamps were not isolated signals, but part of a vast network stretching across 17 square kilometers of industrial wasteland. This was Muster Depot 69/Theta, one node in the Imperium's tithe engine, a machine that transforms worlds into war material through bureaucratic precision and ritualized brutality. A levy is not a moment, it is a calendar. What disembarked tonight had been promised decades ago, when this world's tithe grade was fixed by administratum clerks who would never smell the ash waste or hear the servo skulls hum. Every harvest of grain upstream purchases a harvest of bodies downstream. The Departamento Munitorum sets the cadence, while planetary governors translate births and funerals into quotas and arrears. Worlds that miss their numbers do not receive lenience. They receive auditors, revised ration scales, and surcharges paid in sons and daughters. The camp's hierarchy materialized around the new arrivals, like a bureaucratic liturgy. Drill abbots carried ceremonial canes, topped with miniature aquilus, their authority derived from decades of successful mortality management. Quartermasters operated from reinforced stations, dispensing equipment according to allocation schedules that factored projected casualty rates into initial distribution. Commissars observed from elevated positions, bolt pistols visible but holstered. Discipline problems required permanent solutions. Ministorum priests moved through the crowds, blessing each batch with ritual incense that masked the underlying scent of industrial lubricants and human waste. The intake ritual began immediately. Personal effects disappeared into labeled bins. Photographs became combustible waste. Jewelry became recoverable metals. Letters became security risks. Names underwent translation into 6-digit numerical designations, tattooed onto forearms with stinging efficiency. Hair fell in regulation patterns, measured by stenciled guides. Bodies passed through decontamination chambers that stripped away the last chemical traces of homes, while servo skulls recorded compliance data with mechanical indifference. Beyond the main processing yards, an anomaly demanded attention. A section marked Proving Ground Theta remained sealed behind reinforced barriers, its perimeter clustered with red lamps pulsing in synchronized patterns, 3 beats on, 2 off. Warning signs bore both the skull and cog of the Mechanicus and Commissariat seals, suggesting joint authority over whatever lay within those blast doors. A drill abbot approached with a data slate, calling out numbers in ascending order. When he reached a specific sequence, he paused. "Batch 10, he announced with flat effect. "Theta processing." 23 recruits were diverted toward the double-ruled rectangle, past a shrine where votive candles burned without smoke. No one announced a reason. No one asked. The heavy plasteel door hissed shut behind them, sealing their fate in ambiguous silence. The remaining recruits filed toward barracks assignments, their new numbers called, while red lamps began their evening sequence. The factory had received its fresh material. The pneumatic hiss of sealing doors marked the beginning of systematic erasure. What remained of Batch 10's absence hung in the recycled air, like industrial solvent, present but unspoken, a gap in the roster that no one dared acknowledge aloud. The surviving recruits filed through decontamination chambers, where caustic mist stripped away the last chemical traces of their former worlds, leaving skin uniformly pale and expressionless under harsh lumens. Identity underwent compression into utility. The boy with the scratched canteen became 847,291, the number tattooed along his inner forearm where veins showed blue, a placement chosen for visibility by overseers and firing squads alike. The hive waif beside him received 847,292. Her designation burned into flesh still tender from the delousing chambers. When the tattooing stylus bit too deep, drawing blood, a Ministorum Junior murmured that pain was proof of imperial grace. At slate-topped processing stations, clerks maintained meticulous records with mechanical precision. Each recruit's birth world and levy year were translated into actuarial data, while servo skulls recorded compliance metrics. The clerk assigned to their batch performed one additional function. The skulls did not. Beside each numerical designation, he drew a thin mark in a column labeled Projected Return, then pressed his thumb to smudge it away. Most smears looked identical. Deliberate, practiced, final. Uniform distribution followed industrial logic that assumed loss. Grey fatigues emerged from automated dispensers, their previous owners' fates suggested by dark stains that standard washing could not remove. Boots came mismatched. Extra straw was offered as packing. The quartermaster's ledgers remained visible, their arithmetic of scarcity displayed without shame. 2 added for defect replacements, 1 subtracted from soap allocation. Within hours, an economy emerged from enforced scarcity. The farmhand bit a notch into a scrap of bone and pressed it into another recruit's palm. "Tooth token," he explained, the phrase carrying weight of established protocol. Canteens changed hands based on how dents fit certain grips. A religious icon traded for thicker blankets. Currency indexed to fear and authenticated by pain. Bite patterns were harder to forge than signatures. Bunk assignments placed 847291 and 847292 beneath stenciled catechisms. Obedience is armor. Faith is your shield. The Emperor protects the diligent. These were not slogans but replacement programming, designed to overwrite personal histories with imperial doctrine. The hive waif traced the letters with calloused fingers, while the farmhand clutched his traded canteen, trying to remember names that grew fainter with each passing hour. As evening approached, whispers circulated about Batch 10's continued absence. 23 empty bunks remained stripped and remade by silent orderlies. The red lamps began their synchronized sequence, 3 beats on, 2 off, while servo skulls drifted overhead, recording compliance data. Tomorrow would bring the first lesson in weaponized time, when the day itself became an instrument of control. The factory had processed its fresh material. Now it would begin manufacturing obedience. The klaxons shrieked at 0400 hours, shattering the fragile quiet that had settled over empty bunks where 23 recruits no longer breathed. Time snapped shut like a man-trap around the survivors, each moment weaponized through industrial precision. The day was not lived, but endured. A systematic assault on consciousness designed to strip away individual will and replace it with reflexive obedience. Every second was partitioned according to schedules that treated human endurance as a depletable resource. Drill formation at 0430. Morning catechism at 0600. Weapons assembly instruction at 0700. Mess allocation at 1200. Latrine intervals measured to the minute. Evening prayer at 1900. Lights extinction at 2200. Between these fixed points lay no freedom, only transition periods monitored by servo skulls that recorded compliance data, while drill abbots moved through formations with canes, topped by small bells that chimed once for error, once for witness. Hunger and fatigue were engineered rather than accidental. Ration distribution followed actuarial tables calculating optimal malnutrition, sufficient calories to maintain basic motor functions, insufficient for comfort or resistance. Sleep deprivation operated on similar principles. 7 hours allocated, 4 achieved after accounting for night watches, and the persistent anxiety of red lamp protocols that kept minds churning through regulation rest periods. The first strip ritual arrived without weapons. "Hands learn before minds agree," the drill abbot intoned as hundreds of recruits knelt in formation. On command, they performed precise motions over empty air: strip, inspect, assemble, while reciting the litany of function. 847,291 struggled with the phantom trigger assembly, his farmhand's fingers too accustomed to grain and soil. When he fumbled the invisible mechanism, a cane struck his shoulder with its characteristic bell chime. "The laser gun is your life," the abbot declared. "Your life is the Emperor's currency. Waste neither." The lesson was theological as much as practical. Bodies and weapons shared identical value in Imperial accounting, both expendable resources allocated according to strategic necessity. Muscle memory was carved into nervous systems before metal ever touched flesh, faith preceding function in the factory's systematic programming. Evening catechism merged doctrine with operational procedure as ministorum priests led recitations that dissolved individual voices into collective chant. What is the first duty? To serve the Emperor's will. What is the second duty? To obey without question. The responses came automatically now, personal histories overwritten by Imperial programming. As darkness settled, the red lamps resumed their sequence. 3 beats on, 2 off, accelerating to 4 beats on, 1 off during the deepest watch hours. 847,292 noticed 2 additional bunks standing empty by morning, their blankets pulled tight with military precision. Silent orderlies maintained such cleanliness, appearing and disappearing like industrial phantoms. A drill abbot passed through during night watch, his footsteps measured and deliberate. "The Emperor saves ammunition," he murmured to the darkness, "when you fail early." The red lamps pulsed in response, their rhythm synchronized with something beyond mere illumination protocols. The factory continued its work through calculated hours of artificial night. The empty bunks had taught their lesson, but the officio prefectus required more sophisticated instruments than mere absence. Commissars emerged from administrative shadows, like auditors of the soul, their black greatcoats rustling as they moved through formations with data slates and measured gazes. What had begun as whispered questions about Batch 10 became raw material for a more elegant engine of control, the systematic conversion of fear into testimony, rumor into evidence, doubt into collaboration. Commissar Vex established the protocol during morning assembly, his voice carrying across the drill yard with parade ground precision. "Loyalty is measured not by what you do, but by what you report." The informer ladder bloomed overnight with the ruthlessness of weeds, feeding on engineered scarcity that made every advantage precious. Primary informers reported directly to commissars, receiving protective assignments and enhanced rations. Secondary informers fed information through quartermasters, trading surveillance for material advantages. Tertiary informers operated through confession. Their reports filtered through ministorum priests who blessed betrayal as spiritual cleansing. The quartermaster's allocation system provided currency for collaboration. Preferential ration chits, P1 and P2 grade, purchased loyalty with mathematical precision. P1 bought an extra ladle of corpse starch or supplemental recaf. P2 could be exchanged for sock liners or medical priority status. The exchange rates were never posted but quickly learned. One verified report of seditious speech earned 2 days of enhanced nutrition, documented heretical behavior, purchased a week of survival advantage. Discipline became theatre, each punishment choreographed for maximum psychological impact. The sermon and shot combined homily with execution in a single ritual that sanctified violence while demonstrating its inevitability. When recruit 847,156 was discovered hoarding food, Ministorum priest Cain delivered a 20-minute discourse on imperial abundance, while Commissar Vex loaded his bolt pistol with ceremonial precision. The execution followed the blessing, brain matter mixing with incense smoke that carried undertones of industrial solvent. Servo skulls recorded compliance data as orderlies cleaned plasteel with practiced efficiency. An edict appeared on barracks walls without explanation. Red lamp protocol, theta access, live fire purity proof. Silence is piety. The meaning remained deliberately obscure, creating anxiety that fed the informer network, as recruits competed to demonstrate understanding of regulations they could not possibly comprehend. The red lamps pulsed with accelerating rhythm, 4 beats on, 1 off, their synchronized sequence suggesting purposes beyond mere illumination. 847,291 watched the system consume his bunkmate, when 847,293 traded information about hidden tooth tokens for assignment to kitchen duty. The farmhand learned to sleep with his canteen pressed against his chest, names worn smooth by constant handling. Trust became a luxury that only the dead could afford. 847,292 received a folded slip from a clerk. Report anomalies, piety rewarded. She tucked it beneath her canteen strap, hunger making paper heavy with possibility. The factory had refined its techniques, manufacturing obedience through an economy of fear and food that transformed survival itself into collaboration. The informer network had created its own economy, but beneath official surveillance thrived a shadow market that fed on engineered desperation with industrial precision. Scarcity ceased to be accidental. It became currency, authenticated by pain and impossible to regulate completely. The quartermasters understood this, operating parallel ledgers where survival carried prices measured in small betrayals and accumulated suffering. Tooth tokens proliferated as the camp's primary currency, their bite patterns serving as both signature and proof of desperation. Each notch represented a moment when hunger overcame dignity, the unique dental impressions impossible to counterfeit. 847,291 watched exchange rates fluctuate based on supply shortages and quartermaster moods. 1 token bought supplemental corpse starch, 3 purchased bootliners salvaged from incinerators, 5 might secure stims that masked exhaustion during inspection. The quartermasters weighed tokens like coins, checking bite patterns against slates of registered users. The farmhand traded his remaining token for bread so dense it bent the tin tray. He ate quickly, jaw aching, throwing crumbs into his canteen to mask the metallic taste of recycled water. The transaction occurred in shadows, between barracks where servo skulls maintained minimal surveillance, conducted through hand signals that had evolved into complete gestural language. Medicaid triage bands appeared with increasing frequency, their color codes carrying weight beyond medical necessity. Green indicated full duty status, amber suggested compromised fitness with maintained nutrition, gray marked something deliberately ambiguous. The bands multiplied overnight without corresponding examinations. 847,292 discovered one in the mud beside the latrine trench, its fabric still warm with body heat and bearing a numerical designation she recognized, 847289, who had occupied the bunk 2 rows over until yesterday. Mechanicus Medici operated their own parallel economy, bartering painkillers for manual labor in forge annexes where damaged equipment required human precision. Recruits with technical aptitude found themselves maintaining auspex arrays and vox casters, their fingers learning sacred oils while absorbing radiation doses that would manifest years later as tumors and organ failure. Gallows humor emerged as psychological currency. "The Emperor provides" became standard response to complaints, followed immediately by "the Quartermaster allocates." When rations ran short, recruits observed that faith fills empty stomachs. The jokes served as pressure valves, releasing tension that might otherwise explode into mutiny or madness. That evening, as mess rations were distributed, the red lamps began their sequence with new urgency. 5 beats on, 1 off, then accelerating to continuous crimson glow. The room froze instantly, spoons suspended, mouths half open, breathing regulated. A voice echoed through vox grills, amplified and flat. Batches 7 through 10. Theta processing. Commissar Vex stood by the exit, bolt pistol holstered, eyes scanning numerical designations. Beyond the mess hall, the corridor to Proving Ground Theta breathed antiseptic air, mixed with something metallic and sweet. The factory had perfected its appetite. The march toward Proving Ground Theta proceeded in numerical order, boots echoing against plasteel corridors that exhaled antiseptic chill, mixed with something metallic and organic, the residue of previous selections. Red lamps burned steady now, no longer pulsing, their continuous glow transforming every surface into the color of arterial spray. Servo skulls drifted overhead like mechanical carrion birds, their auspex arrays dilating as they indexed faces to numbers with predatory patience. Commissar Vex walked beside the column, bolt pistol holstered but visible, authority made manifest through restrained violence. Behind him, a Mechanicus engine seer moved with augmetic precision, cables braided into his spine, clicking against floor grates in rhythmic percussion. The corridor stretched longer than architectural necessity suggested, designed to build dread through anticipation. The blast doors to Theta unsealed with pneumatic finality, revealing the true purpose of red lamp protocols. The Proving Ground was a kill corridor, engineered with industrial precision. 30 meters of reinforced plasteel lined with servo turrets whose targeting arrays swept predetermined firing lanes with mechanical hunger. Gas baffles jutted from ceiling mounts, their nozzles aimed at head height. The floor bore stains that standard washing could not remove, dark patterns suggesting previous batches had learned permanent lessons here. Lasguns lay in open cases at the entry line, power cells deliberately half-charged. "Strip! Assemble! Advance!" commanded a drill abbot, his cane raised like a conductor's baton. Recite the litany of function. Stumbles draw correction. The servo turrets hummed to readiness, while auspex skulls positioned themselves at intervals, recording voice patterns and stress indicators with scientific detachment. 847,291 knelt to metal, his farmhand's fingers finding the phantom motions now made real. Around him, voices began the ritualized incantation. "The lasgun is my life. My life serves the Emperor's will, Targeting lasers painted crimson dots across grey uniforms as the first rank advanced. The gas baffles activated, releasing irritant vapor that scored eyes and throats, just enough to spoil fine motor control. The first turret tracked on a stuttered recitation. A lasbolt cracked, bright and absolute. A recruit folded, then another when a charging handle seated imperfectly. The mechanical precision was terrifying. Each stumble converted instantly into statistical data, as clerks updated slates with stylus clicks. Loss rate, 15.2%, 16.9%. The engine seer adjusted a dial. Tolerance margins tightened by calculated increments. Obstacles rose with deliberate cruelty. Waist-high barriers of sandcrete, trenches lined with sparking wire, spans of oil slick grating. Any halt became fatal. Any deviation drew machine attention. 847,291 dragged a wounded comrade toward what appeared to be salvation. A reinforced alcove marked with the cog-toothed skull and the words, "Mercy Station." Inside, mechanized saws hummed with industrial purpose, their purpose revealed through brief glimpses of steel tables and drainage channels. This was not medical extraction, but selection. The wounded sorted according to criteria that had nothing to do with healing. Medici servitors applied triage bands with mechanical efficiency. Green for continued service, amber for compromised function, grey for destinations unmarked on any schematic. 847,292 covered a retreat as the final verse echoed through the chamber. In death, I serve still. She pressed against the alcove entrance, watching servo turrets track survivors with patient malevolence. The saws behind her grew louder, processing something that had once possessed a name and number. Survivors received cog ink marks on their forearms, tattoos applied by servo skulls with surgical precision. The chalkboard updated automatically, 19.0%. Compliance. The red lamps dimmed to their normal pulsing sequence as 847291 searched the flow of bodies for 847292 and did not find her. The factory had completed its selection with characteristic efficiency. The silence that followed theta processing carried the weight of industrial atmosphere, thick with absence, and the mechanical hum of ventilation systems cycling recycled air through chambers that had witnessed systematic selection. The red lamps dimmed from their steady crimson glare, back to the familiar 3 beats on, 2 off rhythm, as though the preceding violence had been merely routine maintenance rather than calculated culling. Munitorum clerks emerged from observation alcoves, with data slates and styluses, their movements precise as clockwork as they began the essential work of reconciling chalk marks to parchment entries. This was bookkeeper quiet. The pause before numbers transformed horror into administrative compliance. Every casualty required verification before it could become official truth. Mortality converted into statistical data through careful arithmetic that treated human lives as inventory adjustments. The triage system operated with mechanical efficiency that reduced bodies to color-coded categories. Medici servitors examined wrists with multi-limbed precision, sorting survivors according to protocols that had evolved far beyond medical necessity. Green bands proceeded directly to continued drill formation, their bearers marked for standard processing through remaining camp phases. Amber bands were diverted to medical wards where treatment competed with resource allocation, healing subordinated to cost-benefit analysis that measured recovery time against training schedules. Grey bands disappeared through unmarked doors toward destinations that appeared on no official schematic. Behind the Mercy Station blast doors, a different kind of processing continued with industrial precision. Mechanicus adepts catalogued biological materials according to compatibility matrices and Forge World requisitions, each component assessed for utility in augmetic reconstruction or servitor construction. Hearts, livers, neural tissue, organs were sorted like manufactured parts, their previous owners reduced to resource allocation entries. The grey-banded recruits had become raw materials, their consciousness dissolved while their flesh served the Omnissiah's greater designs through systematic harvesting that wasted nothing. Penal gang rosters filled simultaneously, their quotas met through careful selection of grey-banded recruits whose physical capacity remained intact despite psychological processing. These formations would serve in mine operations, rad waste reclamation, and forward reconnaissance, where life expectancy measured in weeks rather than years. The assignments carried official designation as Imperial Service, their true nature obscured through bureaucratic language that transformed death sentences into duty assignments. 847,291 searched the returning formation for familiar numbers, his eyes tracking identification tattoos while avoiding direct eye contact with overseers. The hive waif designated 847292 was absent from all counts, her bunk stripped and remade with military precision that erased evidence of her existence. When he approached a clerk about discrepancies, he received only a stylus tap against parchment, and the standard response: "Records reflect compliance." Batch 10 had vanished completely from all official tallies, their numerical designations replaced by a cryptic code, theta null, that balanced other columns without explanation. When a junior scribe questioned the notation, his superior produced a sealed memorandum bearing the Officio Prefectus seal. Cull rate compliance, maintain 17 to 23%. Statistical variance acceptable within operational parameters. The scribe nodded, entered the cleanest figures he had ever written, and made no additional notes. The chalkboard updated automatically with a soft motor's whir, settling on 19.0%, a percentage that matched predetermined targets rather than reflecting actual casualties. The numbers were not accidents, but carefully calculated variables in a larger equation that balanced training efficiency against resource allocation. Arithmetic had done its work with characteristic precision, converting chaos into order through systematic application of violence and administrative efficiency. Evening fell on schedule as servo skulls dimmed their lenses to night settings. In the barracks, 847,291 pressed his canteen against his chest and traced the smoothed impressions of once names, while clerks on the far side of camp blotted ink with practiced efficiency, satisfied that ledgers now agreed with manufactured reality. The factory had completed another processing cycle, its machinery ready for the next phase of manufacturing obedience through faith and fear. The ledgers had balanced, but souls required more sophisticated maintenance than arithmetic alone could provide. As morning klaxons echoed across the industrial sprawl, Ministorum confessors emerged from chapel annexes with portable shrines and pricing schedules, their mission to transform grief into gratitude through systematic application of imperial theology. What theta processing had begun through violence, the ecclesiarchy would complete through ritualized acceptance of loss as divine will made manifest. Confessor Hayne established his station between barracks blocks, the portable shrine equipped with cramped confessional booths designed to inspire claustrophobia, while vox grills distorted voices into mechanical whispers. Confession operated as an intake form for the soul, with penance priced like rations according to spiritual market rates. Minor doubts about training methods cost 3 days of supplemental fasting, their value measured in hunger that brought clarity through suffering. Questions about missing comrades required week-long prayer vigils, exhaustion serving as currency for insufficient faith. Direct challenges to theta protocols earned assignment to corpse detail, where handling the dead provided education in the wages of heretical thinking. When ammunition ran scarce after the proving grounds appetite, commissars borrowed pulpits with bureaucratic efficiency that merged temporal and spiritual authority into single instruments of control. Commissar Vex delivered sermons on acceptable losses while his bolt pistol rested on the lectern like a sacred relic. "The Emperor's arithmetic is perfect," he declared to formations kneeling on bare plasteel. "Every death serves his greater calculation." Piety moved by allocation, faith distributed according to supply schedules that treated belief as another consumable resource requiring careful rationing. The Mechanicus introduced permanent solutions through oath ink tattoos, applied with servo-skull precision to survivors' tendons and weapon hand joints. The process was presented as blessing rather than branding, sacred oils mixed with industrial lubricants, while incense masked the acrid smell of burning flesh. Each mark contained microcircuitry that interfaced with Forge World logistics systems, transforming human bodies into components of larger supply networks. The tattoos carried hidden clauses embedded in high Gothic script, debt relationships that would persist throughout military service, with interest rates compounding through combat casualties and equipment losses. 847,291 submitted to the branding stylus with numb compliance, watching servo-skulls inscribe binding sigils along his tendons. The pain felt distant, processed through psychological filters, systematically installed through weeks of conditioning. Later, in the barracks' dim lighting, he took his canteen and scratched out another name with mechanical precision, the motion feeling wrong but necessary. The metal surface bore only smooth impressions now, identity worn away through constant handling. The system had perfected the art of repurposing grief, filling voids left by the fallen with carefully constructed narratives of sacrifice and duty. The factory had learned to lubricate souls as efficiently as its mechanisms, ensuring that even the deepest sorrow served purposes in the grand calculus of war. The oath ink had barely cooled when new authority arrived through reinforced blast doors, announced by the distinctive whine of luxury transports that had never carried conscript cargo. Schola Progenium officers emerged in pressed uniforms, bearing no stains, their boots polished to mirror brightness, while incense clung to their greatcoats like benediction. They moved with parade ground precision, voices carrying doctrine as if theory could armor flesh against lasfire and shrapnel. Lieutenant Cassius bore the golden aquila of formal education, his range cards pristine and unmarked by the corrections that came through actual casualties. When he positioned squads according to textbook formation during live fire exercises, the geometry ignored wind patterns and ricochet angles that theta processing had carved into the training ground. Doctrine preached conservation of Imperial resources through precision deployment. But the lieutenant's citing corrections rode theory rather than terrain. Drill Abbot Varn stood beside him, uniform bearing accumulated stains that marked decades of practical education in converting flesh into compliance. When Cassius ordered advance across ground that servo turrets had already registered as kill zones, Varn countermanded with quiet authority that violated protocol but saved lives. 2 recruits avoided burns along their ribs because experience trumped manual calculations. The casualties stopped, so did the exercise. Commissar Vex materialized, as if conjured by deviation from approved procedures. Reports were filed in triplicate, while intent was weighed against obedience. The lieutenant's errors became instructional variances in official documentation. Varn's life-saving corrections were recorded as procedural non-compliance. By evening, the drill abbot's cot stood empty, his cane hanging on a peg outside administrative blocks. Reassignment orders carried the neat compression of punishment without trial. The contradiction ran deeper than hierarchy. Scholar doctrine preached asset conservation, while camp practice enforced systematic attrition to guarantee obedience. Theory spoke of strategic deployment. Reality demonstrated industrial culling disguised as selection. The gray-banded processing continued with mechanical efficiency that required no theoretical justification, manifests appearing on administrative slates bearing clinical terminology that transformed horror into logistics. 847,291 discovered the resolution while reviewing transport assignments posted near quartermaster stations. Manifests split gray-banded recruits into dual categories. Penal augmentation marked bodies for mechanized labor gangs, their consciousness preserved for dangerous assignments, where life expectancy measured in weeks. Servitor consignments designated biological platforms for direct conversion. Organs harvested, while neural tissue powered industrial machinery through lobotomized compliance. A familiar number appeared under servitor classification, 847292. The hive waif's designation was appended with mechanicus sigils, indicating immediate processing for Forge World requisitions. 847,291 traced the entry with trembling fingers, oath ink cold against his skin as understanding crystallized. The factory sorted humanity into categories of utility, feeding different mechanisms of the Imperium's war machine through bureaucratic efficiency that treated consciousness as an inconvenient variable in otherwise elegant equations. Transports idled on distant landing platforms, their ramps kissing plasteel while sealed satchels passed between Prefectus couriers and Mechanicus factors. The camp exhaled, and the next sorting drew breath. The transports breathed exhaust across embarkation platforms, where systematic processing reached its bureaucratic conclusion through ceremonies that disguised inventory management as military tradition. Cogitators chattered manifest data to servo skulls while the camp's machinery prepared to ship its products, each surviving recruit a line item balanced against resource allocation quotas that treated consciousness as an administrative variable requiring careful accounting. Regimental formation proceeded through numerical sequence rather than merit or compatibility. The 847th Cadian shock troops bore no relation to Cadia, their banner stapled to formation poles by servo skulls, programmed for ceremonial precision. Companies were stitched from surviving batches according to transport capacity rather than tactical coherence, names assigned through administratum protocols that valued tradition over accuracy. Chaplain Mordus delivered benedictions over formations already blessed by Mechanicus factors, his incense masking industrial lubricants, while manifests flickered on hollow displays. Grey-banded recruits underwent final processing through parallel ceremonies that received no benedictions. Their wrists bore plasteel restraints marked with cogwheel symbols as silent orderlies escorted them toward unmarked transports designated for penal reconstruction. These formations moved with mechanical precision, their consciousness preserved for dangerous assignments where life expectancy measured in weeks. Others disappeared into vessels marked servitor consignment, their biological platforms destined for Forge world conversion through lobotomized compliance. The tooth token economy reached final liquidation at conversion stations near transport ramps. Quartermasters weighed accumulated tokens against voyage requirements, exchanging bite-marked bone for supplemental rations, extra blankets, or priority medical treatment that might extend survival by days. 847,291 traded his remaining tokens for a stimam pool, the transaction recorded in ledgers that balanced scarcity against shipping, manifests with characteristic precision. His oath ink tattoos interfaced with transport systems through servo-skull Auspex scans, the binding sigils glowing as they registered with Forge World logistics networks. The microscopic circuitry confirmed debt relationships that would persist through military service, interest compounding through combat casualties and equipment losses. Around him, other survivors underwent similar processing, their bodies converted into components of supply chains stretching across segmentum boundaries. Prefectus couriers departed with sealed satchels bearing classifications that exceeded camp clearance levels, their contents correlated with grey band processing and biological requisition manifests. Mechanicus factors received crates marked with cog-toothed skulls, their weight suggesting dense biological materials processed according to Forge World specifications. 847,291 scanned the grey-banded formations for familiar numbers, searching for any trace of 847292 among the vacant stairs of those already processed beyond recognition. As ramps began lifting and chains clanked through loading mechanisms, the camp's chalkboards cleared themselves line by line. Red lamps resumed their familiar pulsing sequence across empty barracks, 3 beats on, 2 off, while orderlies prepared facilities for the next intake. The factory had completed another production cycle, converting planetary tithes into military assets through systematic application of violence, faith, and bureaucratic precision. The arithmetic was satisfied. The machinery prepared to begin again. The transport's cogitators interfaced with 847,291's oath ink tattoos as engines cycled toward departure power. The microscopic circuitry warming against his tendon as data streams flowed through Imperial networks. In that moment of technological communion, fragments of classified information leaked through improperly secured channels, a bureaucratic error that revealed the true architecture of systematic horror. A directive materialized on his neural interface, its authentication bearing 3 seals that represented the camp's true masters: the Departamento Munitorum's supply eagle, the Officio Prefectus's skull and laurels, and the Adeptus Mechanicus's cog and skull. The document's high Gothic was merciless in its precision. Operational Memorandum 847-Theta. Cull rate compliance ensures post-deployment obedience and logistical parity with Mechanicus support contracts. Training fatalities offset supply deficits through bio-reclamation and penal augmentation protocols. Maintain 17 to 23% processing variance to guarantee statistical compliance with Forge World requisitions. The mathematics were elegant in their horror. The 19% casualty rate was not a target to be achieved or a failure to be minimized. It was an operational constant, a fundamental parameter that balanced multiple imperial ledgers simultaneously. Every death served 3 distinct purposes within the resource allocation matrix: biological materials tithed to Forge Worlds according to predetermined quotas, penal augmentation, filling dangerous labor assignments, and psychological conditioning that guaranteed post-deployment obedience among survivors. Red Lamp Protocol revealed itself as algorithmic selection rather than warning system. The pulsing sequences, 3 beats on, 2 off, escalating to continuous glow, corresponded to processing schedules synchronized with transport arrivals and Forge World delivery requirements. The servo turrets in Proving Ground Theta operated on tolerance settings, adjusted by Mechanicus engine seers, their lethality calibrated to maintain precise casualty percentages. Commissars received performance evaluations based on their ability to maintain optimal loss rates, too low suggesting insufficient discipline, too high indicating resource waste. The tooth token economy was not a side effect of engineered scarcity, but a sophisticated sorting instrument that identified recruits most capable of surviving on minimal resources. Quartermasters monitored exchange patterns, while servo skulls recorded bite impressions, creating psychological profiles that predicted which bodies would obey at gunpoint and which would require permanent solutions. Each transaction reinforced the camp's control, converting perceived defiance into compliance data. Batch 10 had never existed as a training cohort, but served as a statistical sink, absorbing casualties that exceeded acceptable variance while maintaining the appearance of random attrition. When processing rates fell below quota, additional recruits were transferred to Theta Null classification and disappeared into Forge World manifests. The arithmetic balanced through careful manipulation of records rather than actual training outcomes, creating perfect compliance with bureaucratic requirements. Gray bands designated individuals for dual ledger processing. One path led to Forge Worlds, where organs were meticulously tithed to the Omnissiah, their biological materials feeding the Imperium's industrial complex, according to supply agreements that treated human bodies as renewable resources. The other path channeled broken but functional bodies into penal legions, serving in assignments so hazardous that rapid attrition was guaranteed, maintaining constant demand for fresh recruits while clearing resource allocation bottlenecks. The Oath Inc. debt system locked survivors into Mechanicus supply streams through compound interest that could never be fully repaid. Each tattoo contained microcircuitry that tracked resource consumption, equipment losses, and medical treatment, generating financial obligations that extended far beyond military service. Veterans became permanent debtors, their bodies mortgaged to forge worlds through binding contracts disguised as religious blessing. 847,291 felt the transport shudder as understanding crystallized with terrible clarity. The camp had not manufactured soldiers. It had operated as a multifunctional factory that laundered death into obedience while converting planetary tithes into multiple revenue streams. Living recruits served as military assets with built-in debt obligations. Grey-banded casualties provided biological materials for Forge World production. Penal augmentation filled dangerous labor quotas while maintaining the fiction of continued Imperial service. As the data stream faded and his neural interface returned to dormancy, he traced the smooth impressions on his canteen, where names had been worn away through constant handling. In the transport's dim lighting, a servitor shuffled past, bearing crates marked Biological Requisition, its forearm showing cog ink lattice work he recognized. The factory's arithmetic was satisfied, its machinery already preparing to begin again with fresh material and identical methods. The hidden ledger had revealed its truth. Survival was not victory, but inventory management, and the Emperor's grace was measured in acceptable percentages of systematic destruction. The transport shuddered into ascent, its engines clawing at the thin atmosphere, as Muster Depot 69/Theta receded into a grid of red pulses and industrial smoke. Through reinforced viewports, the camp's true geometry became visible. Not a training facility, but a processing plant, its blast doors and chimney stacks arranged according to throughput efficiency rather than human comfort. 847,291 sat strapped beneath a rack of laser guns, oath ink still warm against his tendons, canteen pressed to his chest, as if pressure could restore what systematic abrasion had worn away. His fingers traced the metal surface where names had once been scratched with desperate precision. Each letter a claim to identity that the factory had methodically erased. The impressions were smooth now, worn to ghost touches that suggested memory without confirming it. Most belonged to numbers that no longer existed in any ledger. 847,292, 847,289, and dozens of others whose designations had been absorbed into statistical sinks and biological requisition manifests. The arithmetic was satisfied, the names were not. A servitor shuffled past with mechanical precision, distributing ration packs according to manifest requirements. The thing bore cog ink tattoos along exposed tendons, the microscopic circuitry still functional despite the lobotomized compliance that had replaced consciousness. 847,291 recognized the lattice pattern, identical to his own binding sigils, suggesting shared origins in the camp's processing chambers. The servitor's vacant stare held no recognition of shared tooth tokens or barracks conversations. The factory had claimed another product with characteristic efficiency. Commissar Vex moved through the compartment, his greatcoat rustling as he conducted final inspection of his charges. When scanning systems verified debt status and behavioral compliance ratings, he murmured a quiet prayer devoid of comfort. Acceptable losses serve the Emperor's will. His arithmetic is perfect. The liturgy that followed was not for the dead, but for the system, voices joining in mechanical recitation that sanctified the brutal mathematics governing their survival. The revelation of the hidden ledger had stripped away all illusion. The red lamps were not warnings, but accounting instruments, their pulsing sequences synchronized with processing quotas and Forge World delivery schedules. Tooth tokens had been sorting mechanisms rather than rebellion, measuring capacity for informal economy and willingness to betray. Grey bands had designated dual ledger processing, organs tithed to the Omnissiah, consciousness preserved for penal augmentation. Everything had been metric, every action a data point in calculations that treated human souls as renewable resources. Survival carried no heroism, only compliance with procedures designed to maximize utility while minimizing cost. The lessons carved into flesh and memory were simple. Drink when told, eat when you can, hide your hope, learn the litanies, count exits, never trust the red lamps. They were accounting signals, not warnings. Stand when they pulse, steady. Freeze when they accelerate. Never ask after missing batches. Never believe in mercy stations. The canteen knocked against the bulkhead as artificial gravity fluctuated, its hollow sound echoing through recycled air. 847,291 continued tracing worn impressions, searching for names that grew fainter with each passing hour. No triumph waited ahead, only endurance measured in acceptable percentages and systematic processing that would continue regardless of individual survival. Stars wheeled past in patterns suggesting vast distances and longer wars, their light reaching across void that cared nothing for the factory's products or its methods. The hand kept moving across smooth metal, and the transport kept climbing toward battlefields, where the camp's methodology would be validated through casualty reports and replacement requisitions. The names were worn smooth. The counting continued.